Thank you for the introduction, and welcome. Today I'll be talking about core escalation, which explores how privilege can be escalated from the normal world to the secure world with the assistance of different cores running on the same SoC on your smartphone. My name is Guanxing Wen, and I'm a security researcher at Pangu. In addition to interests and experiences I have written on this slide, I have dedicated several years to Huawei smartphone research. And that got me the first place in Huawei Bug Bounty program in both 2021 and 2022. Previously, I have been presented on topics such as BL31 of Huawei P20 in 2019, and the boot room of Huawei Mate 30 in 2021. So I think it's only natural for you to guess this talk in 2023 would be focused on something related to Huawei Mate 40 or P40. I should close this. That assumption is partially correct, especially when it comes to motivation behind this research. You see, Huawei smartphones firmware, particularly those associated with boot chain and Trustzone, have been encrypted using a unique key for each chipset. Only TEE level privilege can operate a hardware crypto engine to use this key for firmware decryption. However, the boot room exploit I previously used to build a decryption oracle was patched on Kirin 9000. Therefore, for Mate 40 and newer devices, I need to find a different approach. At that moment, the only viable solution I have came up with is to follow the tradition, which involves discovering TEE level vulnerabilities on old chipset and hoping they still work on a new device. This typically involves at least 3 phases in this process. First, we need a root exploit. This doesn't necessarily have to be a zero-day exploit targeting the latest kernel. Any high-quality one-day exploit, such as those finding GPU drivers, could suffice in most cases. Usually, within a year's time frame, there is at least one feasible exploit available. Next, we need to find a vulnerability in the trust application, and potentially a third vulnerability in TEUS to acquire sufficient privilege to operate a crypto engine. Exploiting TEE-level vulnerabilities on Huawei smartphones is considerably more challenging due to firmware encryption, as we cannot know the layout, the gauges, and offsets in prior. So to successfully achieve this goal, the vulnerability we are going to discover should be of very high quality. Ideally, there should be logic bugs that can work consistently across different versions and do not rely on any specific offset or gauges. And there are 2 primary attack surfaces for Trustzone or TEE, that is BL31 and TEUS. In the context of bug hunting for this particular task, I opt to focus more on TEUS instead of BL31. And the rationale behind this decision is as follows. BL31 is built upon ARM Trusted Firmware open source project, which has been thoroughly tested and validated over an extended period, while additional components introduced by Huawei may have vulnerabilities. Additional components introduced by Huawei in BL31 may have vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities often manifest as memory corruption issues that rely on specific offset or gauges to exploit. On the other hand, TEUS is a proprietary operating system developed entirely by Huawei. As a comprehensive operating system, it exhibits a higher level of complexity, and this increased complexity makes it more likely that logic bugs will be present. To delve into the details of TEUS, I recommend referring to Alexander and Max Smith's talk from last year's Hexcon conference. They provide a comprehensive and insightful overview. The vulnerability I find resides within the memory management module of TEUS. Memory management tends to conceal such high-quality vulnerabilities, If you ever came across with vulnerabilities in GPU as well as those like dirty cow or dirty pipe, you understand that TEUS is not an exception. Initially, I believed that the non-secure and secure world are divided statically during the booting phase. Well, for the sake of efficient DRM video stream decryption, a mechanism has been implemented in TEUS. It can switch the non-secure pages into secure state dynamically. This avoids the need for excessive data copying between the two realms. And the trusted application called SEC memory exports related interfaces such as SION alloc and SION free to the normal world. The term SION here is derived from ION, which is a physical memory management mechanism used in Android. When allocating an ION FD using DRM heap as a mask, the kernel will invoke SLN interface beneath to register these pages into the TEUS. And the TEUS will then switch the page into a secure state, and the corresponding buffer ID, which is similar to ION FD, is returned to the normal world. This buffer ID will be stored in an extended variable within ION buffer structure. Later, when we invoke a trust application with TEC ION input parameter set as ION FD, the kernel will translate this FD to buffer ID before sending messages to the TEUS. And then the correlated physical pages will be mapped by the TEUS to the memory space of the trust application for further usage. And the vulnerability lies within this multi-phase allocation and usage process. There are no explicit checks for the pages address. The only firewall in place appears to be the normal world kernel, as the allocated pages should fall within the range of ION pool. However, the SLN interfaces can be invoked directly with EL0 privilege. This allows us to pass any physical pages we desired and receive a buffer ID. The issue here is not with the secure switch of the page state itself, but rather with the fact that the buffer ID can become associated with any physical pages we specified. The most convenient exploitation method without modifying the kernel involves first allocate an DRM masked ION FD using ION driver. This will create a combination of ION FD and buffer ID in the kernel space. Then we invoke SION free directly from EL0 level with the same buffer ID, followed by another SION alloc with any physical pages we specified. The buffer ID in this case is relatively straightforward infer. It is allocated sequentially, searching from a free list with the first available ID being utilized. Initially, we can invoke SION alloc to determine this counter, and then the subsequent buffer ID allocated by the kernel can be obtained simply by incrementing this counter by 1. And after these use-of-free-like operations, the buffer ID will be reused. And from the perspective of the kernel, it appears nothing has actually occurred. So later, when we use this buffer ID for some other trust applications, the physical pages we specified will be mapped as a buffer for overwriting or reading from. So next, we will attempt to pass this buffer ID to a DRM-related trust application. For Huawei devices, this is called China DRM Common TA. If the parameter we pass suggests that the video stream is not encrypted, then the process of decryption is downgraded to a simple memory move. From the related code snippet, you can observe two mapping calls. The first map uses an ION buffer that we control as the source. And the second map uses the buffer ID as the parameter to map the correlated physical pages as the destination. Obviously, this source and destination will be used by the memory move directly. So what we have gained here is a highly practical primitive. That is a secure level physical pages overwritten with controlled content. However, there is one limitation. The memory maps is called blacklist. The memory belongs to TEUS and BL31. Even though this serves as a global mitigation for the entire TEUS, it do prevent us from directly sabotaging the secure world's code. By examining the DDR memory layout, we can observe that there are other sections such as SEC camera, NPU SEC, and model mask that seem to use some kind of secure memory according to its name. Consequently, a question arises. Does fully compromise the secure world truly necessitate obtaining code execution of BL31 and TEUS? What about these other sections? And what about the cores using these sections as their memory? To address this question, we will have to zoom out and take a broader view of the secure world high-level infrastructure. When we refer to normal and secure, we primarily mean the software running in different privilege levels on the ACPU side. From the hardware's perspective, the primary distinction between these two worlds is the secure signal correlated with read and write operations sending on a bus. When attempting to access DDR memory or peripherals, the secure signal serves as a primary basics for controllers such as TZASC and TZPC to determine whether this access is allowed. In addition to ACPU, there are other cores running on the same SoC. Roughly speaking, if any of these cores were able to send secure signals on a bus, they might have the same access to the secure resources just like ACPU. To illustrate this concept and also to continue our particular exploit, I chose IOMCU as our next target. Looking at the memory layout again, it appears that the IOMCU has obtained a portion of DDR for its firmware. And since this firmware is not encrypted, we can quickly analyze its code logic and infrastructure. And after that, I just override its memory and see what's happening. And the outcome is quite promising, as our shell code gets executed almost immediately, as indicated by the crash log. Moreover, I confirmed that the IOMCU acts as a secure master, capable of sending secure signals on a bus. Another positive aspect is that the IOMCU reboots itself automatically during a crash without impacting the rest of the system, allowing us to conduct multiple attempts. And this feature is very helpful, especially during the testing phase, as we don't pick and poke, crash the entire system and wait for the reboot. That will be very inefficiency. Also, this feature makes our exploit 100% reliable. We can try again and again until we succeed. Even though the code logic within the IOMCU's firmware doesn't seem to have any interesting operations, the kernel source code suggests that the internal SRAM of LPMCU is exposed to IOMCU. The LPMCU is a very powerful core. You might recall this from my previous research. It is responsible for the boot room to run. Naturally, we can infer that its DMA capabilities is perhaps the most potent on the entire SoC, as the boot room is responsible to loading the rest of the system into the memory, so it must have this high privilege. So let's again try to pivot to LPMCU from IOMCU. Even though the firmware of LPMCU is encrypted, we can dump its memory by having IOMCU reading its internal SRAM and save the content using an RDR mechanism, which functions similarly like a lost message during a crash. Many cores have such handlers to facilitate the RDR process. So in this case, I choose to patch the RDR handler function of LPMCU. Since this handler is invoked automatically when some other cores crash, such as IOMCU, all we need to do is to induce a crash at the end of our IOMCU shellcode to trigger the execution of our injected LPMCU shellcode. And after that, we have pivoted us from IOMCU to LPMCU. As a matter of fact, we have just achieved the highest privilege on the SoC. An additional benefit we have here is to dump the boot room from 0 address for further analysis, as the LPMCU is the one who runs the boot room. While we typically consider the ACPU as the powerhouse, recent years' mitigation actually bolstered LPMCU, shifting certain privilege operations such as DMSS management from ACPU to LPMCU. With our tool primarily built for the ACPU side, let's conclude by utilizing the DMA transfer function of LPMCU to patch the BL31 running on the ACPU side. We will add a RWX wrapper as a replacement of any unused SMC handler within BL31. And after that, actually, we have achieved the ACPU EL3 privilege, which traditionally believes to be the highest privilege on the SoC. And we did this with a very reliable exploit, effectively transforming our Mate40 device into a testing platform. To proceed, we can continue to patch the TEUS to establish a decryption oracle for any subsequent Kirin 9000 firmwares. Since the loading of the modem image already includes decryption logic, all we need to do is to modify this hard-coded name string inside, which restricts the firmware, which restricts the decryption logic to specific firmwares. Okay, let's move on to the demo. In this demo, I'm going to obtain the root privilege first with a kernel exploit. Given the outdated version of my Mate40, there are several choices, and it is not a point of this talk, so I will skip its explanation. Then we will use the secure overwritten primitive to get the code execution on IOMCU. If everything goes correct, the program counter will be set to 9337-1234, indicated by the crash log. Then the shellcode will pivot itself from IOMCU to LPMCU and then back to the ACPU EL3. With this, we can employ a kernel module to use this SMC handler to dump the decrypted memory. Here, we just use this decryption oracle to decrypt the TEUS firmware. So what do we have just accomplished? To summarize, we have pivoted from ACPU EL0 to IOMCU, then to LPMCU, and then finally back to ACPU EL3. This serves as a vivid example of how core escalation operates. At this moment, you may be wondering what else can we infer from this new attack model. And to address this question, we have to revisit the secure world high-level infrastructure. In the last example, most of our passes fall within the left side of this figure. So what about the other side? When we refer to peripherals, it is important to recognize that IOMCU, LPMCU, ACPU can all be perceived as a peripheral or coprocessors from the viewpoint of other cores. So the role of this master and slave can be reversed as long as there is a communication mechanism designed to facilitate their interaction. So to generalize the idea of core escalation in this path, we have to delve into the details of how these cores are communicated with one another. Let's then explore several popular and well-known intercore communication mechanisms, also known as the cross-core attack surface. One of the most recognized interfaces is DMA. A notable example would be Gale's research on Wi-Fi chipset, where after remotely gaining code execution on the Wi-Fi core, an attack to the kernel was initiated using the DMA engine. Another remarkable work was carried out by Daniel and Laurent on Huawei smartphones in 2021. After remotely acquiring control of the modem, they used the DMA to directly attack the Trustzone. Mailbox is another prevalent and crucial mechanism for cross-core communication. It serves as a hardware-based memory slot. And in Kirin chipside, this slot is 64 bytes in size, with the first 32 allocated for control registers, and the remaining 32 dedicated to share data between these two cores. Let me provide you an example of a vulnerability I discovered in the LPMCU's mailbox handler. This is also the handler that we have mentioned in the first example, serving to facilitate the RDR process. As you can see, the first integer from the mailbox data represents as a command ID, which should be 80202. And the handler then calls RDR init with another two integers from the mailbox data, representing as physical address and size. All these values from the mailbox can be fully controlled from the ACPU side. And the vulnerability here is a classical integer overflow. Consequently, the address can be any value greater than 2 F150s, and the size is actually irrelevant as it is not used by the rest of the code. Then the address value is passed to the DMA transfer function directly as the destination, allowing us to override a large range of physical memory, including the internal SRAM of LPMCU. Shared memory is another extensively employed mechanism by different process, modules, and cores for communication purposes. Usually, large data transfers, such as login messages, rely on shared memory. And it is crucial to notice that any pointer offset stored on the shared memory can be modified by both cores. Therefore, neither core should solely rely on these values. Allow me to provide you another example of a vulnerability I discovered in the ISP firmware. A range of physical pages is shared between ACPU and ISP to facilitate the logging mechanism. And the ISP uses a fixed virtual address, C1850s, to access this range of memory. As a EL0 user application, we can have the same access by mapping the kernel driver file. And the problem arises when the ISP core uses the pointer from the shared memory directly without any verification. This allows us from a EL0 level, we can manipulate the ISP core to write data to anywhere we specified with memory copy. Additionally, there are other hardware-specific issues, such as internal memory or control registers being exposed, like the LPMCU case we have mentioned. Depending on the hardware interplay mentioned, there are other issues to consider, such as the firmware not being correctly verified or it is not running in the protected memory. Now that we have covered some aspect of cross-core communication, also known as the attack surface for cross-core attack, let's conclude with a concrete example. The ISP responsible for image processing in the camera may not initially seem like a secure master. However, for the sake of face recognition features on the cell phone, it is granted with secure privileges. And apparently, the face recognition is a feature that can only implement it in the secure world. And that's why this ISP core also have this high privilege. But surprisingly, it doesn't seem that the ISP core verified its firmware sending from the ACPU side. Even though the loading process of this firmware is complex beneath, testing and exploiting this particular exploit can be summarized in one line of bash command. And after that, as long as we power on the ISP core using its driver, our injected shell code will run. And that pivot us from the ACPU to ISP. Before going any further, we have to discuss the mitigations here. The ISP exploit took place in the middle of last year, and several mitigations have been implemented since then to address the cross-core attack. Two notable ones are DMSS and CFG bus. They are the obstacles for our ISP exploit to go any further, to pivot to other cores and gain highest privilege. This serves as a hardware-based firewall for unintended memory and MML access. DMSS has been extensively discussed in Daniel's talk, where a memory table is used to define access ranges for different masters. He also mentioned the existence of CFG bus, which functions similarly for MML access management. Upon closer inspection, I observed that during the power-on phase of ISP core, no DDR memory is accessible. And the MML range, including the DMSS table and the internal SRAM of LPMCU, is off limit because of CFG bus configuration. However, CFG bus itself remains accessible. Therefore, we should further explore CFG bus to find a way to bypass its mitigation. After exhaustive testing of the control bits of CFG bus, it becomes clear that the first 64 bits consists of mask for different masters. This deduction can also be made by comparing different versions of Harmony OS, as the number of the bits decreases, indicating the removal of masters due to security reasons. We can also determine the offset and the length value inside the CFG bus registers, but none of this information helps us to bypass its mitigation. Unlike DMSS that has been in existence on Huawei smartphones for many, many years, CFG bus is only enabled last year or the year before last year. And that means by default, it is disabled. BL31 is responsible to configure the CFG bus registers during the boot phase. By examining how CFG bus is enabled, I discovered a disable, configure, enable logic. And with some furthermore experimentation, I noticed that by writing 0 to this particular address, FE252008 completely disables CFG bus. And after that, we regain the ability to read and write memory of LPMCU. And also we can modify the DMSS table to give LPMCU full access to the DDR memory. So we can reuse the same technique in the first example, pivoting to LPMCU and then patch BL31 running on the ACPU side. Okay, let's move on to the next demo. The universal ISP exploit is showcased on a P40 device, as our Mate40 is used for a decryption oracle and won't upgrade. But the P40 is actually running the latest version of Harmony OS at that moment. Please notice that for the demonstration, the correct screen password is set to 6 ones, and this is what we're going to bypass later. The ISPW here is a program I have written to talk to the kernel driver. It can power on and power off the ISP core directly. And with this exploit, we will do the same thing, patch BL31. After that, we will employ a kernel module to search and patch a trust application called Weaver, which is responsible for the screen password verification. Once patched, any entered password will be recognized as correct. So this time, 6 twos or 6 threes can all be used to unlock the screen. In summary, this concludes our presentation. For security researchers, investigating how different cores operate and communicates will lead to valuable passes for privilege escalation. And cross-core attack, as well as core escalation, represents a potent technique with few specific mitigations. Traditional mitigations tends to focus more on software-level bugs. And lastly, for chipset vendors, it is imperative to carefully consider the implication of adding new components to the secure world. Storing something in the secure world does not automatically make it safe. On the contrary, it becomes an additional attacking surface, leading to increased complexity and challenges for writing bug-free software. The secure world should strive for simplicity whenever possible. Here, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Tiele Wang for his invaluable assistance in preparing my Black Hat proposal. I would also like to extend my appreciation to John Dixon for his support in preparing this presentation. Without their unwavering support, this presentation would not have come to fruition. And I'm open to any questions you may have. You're also very welcome to join me during the Meet and Greet event this afternoon. Thank you.